my name's Mike Rogerson. I'm a PhD student at the University of Bath School of Management. And today I'm going to talk through a paper called Blockchain, Case Studies in Food Supply Chain Visibility, which is about to be published in Supply Chain Management and International Journal, which I wrote with Professor Glenn Parry at the University of Surrey. Blockchain has been in the news a lot in the last 5 years or so because of its use in cryptocurrencies, but it's recently been seen as more useful in other areas. One of the main ones of which being supply chains, where there are problems of trust and problems of veracity and provenance of product. We started to investigate how blockchain could be used by looking at some of the companies that have been putting it into action. The theory we're looking at in this paper is supply chain visibility. Traditionally, firms have used traceability and tracking solutions so that they can look at where the product has been as it passes along the various nodes and stages of the supply chain. But increasingly, consumers and focal companies are wanting to know what's happening at those stages. So we're looking at the detail of what happens to the product and the visibility of what happens, as opposed to simply where a product has been or where it's come from. More recent developments in technology have allowed, for example, GPS data points, Internet of Things, to be included, so we get a greater density of data and we can build up a much better picture, greater visibility of what is going on along the supply chain. So in food terms, which is what we look at, we're looking at everything from farm to consumer, or in fisheries terms, from the fisheries through the vessels, through processing plants, into where the product is sold, and eventually into a tin or the fishmonger that you might buy your fish from. So the methodology we use for this paper is that it's based on qualitative interviews. We initially approached as many firms as we could that we knew were working in or around the blockchain ecosystem. That turned out to be 73 organisations that we approached, of which 42 responded. Of those, 28 we managed to get interviews with. That's 28 interviews of 15 firms, and eventually that was narrowed down to only 4 case studies. So we collected primary data through interviews with the 4 case studies, and we used secondary data in the form of archival materials, company reports and the like, to generate the 4 case studies that we used. We then drafted the 4 case studies and sent them off to the firms to check the veracity of what we'd said. Anything that they came back with that we weren't sure of or they weren't comfortable with, we re-interviewed them, we filled in the detail in that way, and from that point we wrote up the 4 case studies and the rest of the paper. So the 4 case studies we use are Techrock, a Chinese producer of infant formula; AgriDigital, an Australian firm which uses blockchain to monitor agricultural products as they go through the Australian supply chains that they're involved in; the World Wildlife Fund and Traceable, a joint venture looking at fisheries in the Pacific; and a firm which chose to remain anonymous for the paper, which we've called Demeter, after the Greek god of agriculture. The first case, Techrock, is very interesting because of the product that they are using blockchain to gain visibility into supply chains. There have been a lot of scandals, particularly in China, around the quality of infant formula and the safety of the product. And it turns out that Chinese consumers are willing to pay a large premium to ensure the quality and the safety and the veracity of that product. So Techrock uses a system in which they put an RFID tag into the lid of the barrel, which consumers can then scan using a smartphone app. And that will tell them not only that the barrel itself has not been tampered with, but where it's come from and what the various stages that barrel has been through in production, therefore guaranteeing the veracity, the quality and the safety of the product. The second case study we looked at is the World Wildlife Fund and Traceable, as a joint venture for Pacific fisheries. And that's a really interesting case study because there are lots of problems in Pacific fisheries. Firstly, there's a problem of labour exploitation. Secondly, there's a problem of fishery sustainability. And both of those problems are being looked at by organisations such as the UN, but until now, there's not been a solution that anyone has come up with. Now, blockchain might not be the entire solution for that, but what it can do is give more visibility into what's going on in Pacific fisheries, and that's what the two companies have found out working together. The third case we looked at is AgriDigital, the Australian provider of agricultural services. They use blockchain for two reasons. Firstly, they use it in smart contracts to release payments and track payments along the supply chain. And secondly, they use it to prove the organic status of the products that they ship. The fourth case study that we did is Demeter, which is a company that uses blockchain to trace the veracity of wines and other foodstuffs. They tag each bottle with a unique identifier that then enables the consumer to see where the bottles come from, the farm that the grapes were grown on, where the wine was produced, and who is involved at every stage of that process. What we found from the 4 case studies is that blockchain is a very interesting and useful part of a wider solution that can deliver the kind of visibility that focal firms in supply chains and their customers are increasingly demanding. That's particularly true at scale and for products where customers are willing to pay the kind of price premium associated with the Techrock example that we gave, where that, in their eyes, is a guarantor against contamination in a product. Problems remain, and those are, as we found, largely in 4 areas. Firstly, there's a challenge of trust of the technology. Not only have businesses overpromised on trust before, but also this is a complex technology that is hard to understand, and consumers will need to be able to understand that for themselves in order to trust what's behind it. Secondly, blockchain is most useful in digitized systems where human input and therefore the potential for fraud and error are minimized. And in the case of, for example, the World Wildlife Fund and traceable case study, the areas of the world that they're working in do not have the digital infrastructure to be able to guarantee that, potentially reducing blockchain's impact. The third problem is governance, and the main problem there is how firms between each other use blockchain, what the systems are, and who is governing the system that is being used to create supply chain visibility. The fourth issue is consumer access to data and the willingness to pay. As we've already discussed, in some cases, consumers are willing to pay a price premium. However, the amount of data, the volume of data that they can have access to, needs to be thought of carefully. Because while firms want to generate a certain level of trust, there are competition implications and data sensitivity that will need to be overcome in order for them to do this. So what do we show? We've shown evidence of 4 case studies of blockchain's use in the wild, where we demonstrate that blockchain can provide visibility in exchanges and reliability of data. This provides product provenance and guards against counterfeit. We also show that problems remain, and that those are largely around the physical-digital interface of products.